what we see, the reality, is that really just a user interface designed by evolution to simplify something far more complex than it.
All right, welcome to the 15th episode of the AI Space Podcast. AI isn't just the future, it's the force rewriting the rules of business, wealth creation, and society. Like it or not, it's going to mint the next generation of trillionaires. The only question you have to ask yourself is this: will I blaze a path, follow the crowd, or be left in the dust? Are you a passionate founder, innovator, or technologist seeking to grow, scale, and win with AI? Well, this is an AI show for you. Why? We invite visionary founders and trailblazing leaders who are in the trenches, pioneering innovative strategies and technology solutions in the AI space. They share their amazing journeys and hard-fought, battle-tested, real-world, game-changing insights with us. This is not just another AI podcast. We're building a movement. We're building a community committed to help each other create value, drive economic impact, and build the AI-powered future ethically and responsibly to build a lasting legacy for business and society. So as I said, this is the 15th episode, and we're thrilled to have Rana Gujral, co-founder and CEO of Behavioral Signals. Welcome, Rana. Behavioral Signals is an enterprise software company that specializes in analyzing human behavior from voice data using deep learning and NLP, or natural language processing, providing insights into emotions, intentions, and behaviors. Rana Gujral is a renowned entrepreneur and thought leader in the AI space, recognized for his contributions as a speaker and columnist in publications like TechCrunch and Forbes. An award-winning entrepreneur, his TEDx talks challenge your thinking and make you question whether you're living in a reality or just a simulation. I'm your host, Sanjay Kalluvilayil, founder and CEO of Stonehaas Advisors. So Rana, here on the AI Space Podcast, we highlight game-changing insights that drive innovation and scale business initiatives. First of all, welcome. We're going to get right into it. What do you see as the hottest trends in AI, short, medium, long term?
Excitement and the practical reality. It's the quantum supremacy is often portrayed as imminent, but most of the use cases still remain theoretical. And what's really fascinating here is whether, the tech becomes the next fusion energy. I think it's perpetually maybe 10 years away, or actually crosses over into practical mainstream applications. So I still think that, that the hype is essential to keep the funding and excitement alive, but we might still be looking at a longer timeline than most think. So that's pretty interesting. And I've been spending a bunch of time on this, in my, nighttime reading list things. And the other thing that's really exciting is biological computing. And so this is sort of like the new frontier. The companies like Cortical Labs are creating these neural nets, and they're growing the neural networks using biological neurons in a lab setting, and showcasing that these neurons can successfully learn to play Pong. And so pretty fascinating. I mean, we're getting into sort of like where, this shift towards wetware computing isn't just theoretical, it's happening now. I mean, although at a very sort of like basic level. But then, eventually this can redefine computing power by harnessing the plasticity and resilience inherent in biological systems. And this could be a fundamental change down the line. And I think it was really, really exciting.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think those are great insights. Next question: what do you see as the top AI strategies to unlock exponential growth, scale operations, and boost valuations?
I think there's so many AI strategies. I think the biggest opportunity is just looking at how you're solving for a problem today and leveraging the tools that are at your disposal. I think that's the biggest opportunity. These tools are new, and these tools have been recent, and they have matured really, really fast. And what I see is that most people, companies and individuals don't really have a good understanding of, one, what these tools are, but even when they understand what these tools are, how do you really use them? That requires training and thinking and education. And I'd say, there's stuff like what I talked about, but all that is, a little bit out there. what you can do today is use these tools and embed them into your core business, every part of your core business. So I've been like spending time with my EA. I say, when you're doing X, use these tools, and use this effectively in these manners. So that's a simple example. But if your engineers are not coding using Copilot, I think that's just not being good engineers at this point. I mean, you need to be leveraging those tools. You can enhance your output. So I think there's so many examples like that.
I think I agree with you because you can have the handyman belt with all the tools in there, but if you don't know, do I need to use a Phillips or a regular screwdriver or a wrench, right? If you don't know what the problem you're solving, right, and you have a hammer for is the only tool that you're using, it's not a good situation. And I like what you also said about if you're not using a Copilot, because at the end of it is like there's a sense of pride, right? Like people say, I'm doing it all by myself. I think that's where people get left in the dust, as we talked in the beginning, right? And you're actually doing yourself a disservice if you're trying to do all the heavy lifting, and you should spend more time on the creativity. So I think those are really good insights from you.
Well, it's akin to saying, I want to till the land using my own hands when there's a tractor available. And, there's nothing smart about doing so. By the way, using a tractor requires skills. So not everyone can use a tractor. You need to know how to drive the tractor and how to use that machinery. So um, that that is a skill that is in high demand right now. But the tractor's sitting right there in your field, and if you insist on going and tilling it with your own hands, go for it. But there's your competition using the tractor. So
Yeah, and there's some societies that even refuse to use oxen. It's still using humans to do it. So, yeah. Well, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got here? What led you in this forward into AI and your path into behavioral signals?
I kind of sort of look at my journey in a phase approach. I'd say the first phase was mostly all corporate. I built out different technology products, both hardware and software, in very typical corporate settings. Both on the enterprise side and on the consumer side. So built out the smart home, initials 1.0 for Logitech, and the cloud and the biometrics device business for Kronos. And then I had this amazing opportunity to go do a private equity backed turnaround with this company, which was an iconic company, market leader, at a leadership position of $500 million in sales, had gone all the way down to 30 million. And this was over a course of 25 years of being in business. And so we got an opportunity. And it was losing 100 million a year with 300 million of debt. And so had the opportunity to see if we could bring it back to life, which how many opportunities do you get like that? I think, either it's never or one or two max, and so um, it was a fantastic experience. We not only got it back to life, but we got it back to thriving. Had 112 million EBITDA movement in 24 months and tripled the revenues. And eventually the company IPO'd at 4.5 billion, 4.4 to be exact. And it was a great run. And then I had a burning idea in my mind about building a vertical SaaS, which is what I did with Ties. And that was the first opportunity for me to really use AI, in a tangible manner. So we use machine learning to build these engines that predict prices for commodities, which was an essential core part of the workflow of the software that we were building. And so after Ties' acquisition, I went back to Logitech for a bit, but behavioral signals, which I didn't found, but I'm the CEO, and this company had been focusing on this immense research around understanding what's happening inside the human mind, tapping into various aspects of emotions and behaviors, but really understanding cognition at its core. And we've come a long way from just sort of emotions and behaviors. Now we're looking at other more advanced mental states into experience and satisfaction, decision-making, intent, among other things. And so the goal really was to, where do we apply it? How do we, how do we commercialize these technologies, and where do we focus? And so we've been We've been really doing that over the last several years and having a lot of fun with that approach. And I'm going to tell you more about what we do. But yeah, that's been the journey.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your target segments, some of your main use cases. I think in the introduction we talked about combining certain elements, which is very important for AI. I think we think about AI in terms of data, but looks like your company's trying to connect some of the nuances. And like in a human conversation, there's emotion, there's other signals in there. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that, right?
Yeah. So our mission has evolved into two powerful strategic fronts. First is the CCaaS, this contact center as a service landscape. And the second is defense application. So on CCaaS, we've already proven that the emotional intelligence is it's a critical advantage, and so now we're significantly enhancing our solutions. We're building, enabling enterprises not just to understand sentiment, but also to predict intent and match real time matching of individuals that maximize outcomes and really revolutionize customer interactions and outcomes. And on the defense front, we're pushing the boundaries even further. So our latest innovation, which is behavioral mapping for deepfake detection, is not just state of art, it's genuinely unprecedented, right? So unlike the traditional methods that even I'd say the biggest players in this industry rely on, um, you know, which is really looking for audio discrepancies, our AI uniquely identifies micro emotional and behavioral inconsistencies. It sees beyond pixels and frequencies, directly tapping into the subtle, involuntary emotional signatures that even the best deepfake technologies cannot authentically replicate. And so it's foundationally just changing how security sector, approaches identity validation and digital trust. And we're getting lots of interest in that space. But I'd say, those two things have been our core focus. But what's truly exciting is that we're building today. What we're building today represents essential building blocks for achieving AGI. And emotion cognition isn't just a mere feature; it's a core. It's core to genuine sentience, and understanding and interpreting and predicting human emotions is fundamental to creating true general intelligence. And so, in a sense, what we're doing is we're constructing what you can think of as an emotional operating system. It's like the core that the future AGI systems will rely on. So I see one playing a big role in making AGI happen, and the second is the 2, 3, 4 decades post AGI, I think will play a big role. We won't just support advanced, functions such as maybe, being the brain inside the humanoid assistants. The empathetic brains, but also the sort of the low hanging fruit that's currently sort of propping up, which is agentic voice agents that don't just converse naturally, but understand and truly understand and intuit human feelings, desires, and even fears. So I think what you're seeing is that the line between human and machine interactions are blurring, and in emotional intelligence is that glue. It's the meaningful, ethical, and trusted relationship between humans and AGI that is really provided by this, and we're playing a role there. So it's very exciting that we get to do that.
No, that's great. I think especially on a couple items, the contact center as a service, right? So like an agent is talking to a potential prospect or a lead, and they're having a conversation, and there may be, a person on the other end may be seem like, oh, this person, we've all been there as sales guy. Oh, this person's definitely going to buy, and they never buy. There may be some signals that are coming out that says, well, actually, this person is just agreeing with, is not going to buy, and there may be another person that you think, oh, this guy will never buy or gal, but actually they're just being a little bit more reticent signals, and there may be some lost opportunities. I think so. Not just going on face value, and then when you get into deep fake aspect of things, it's kind of like trying to read a poker face, right? When people are playing poker, they try to find the tell of somebody, or a psychopath or whatever it's going to be. Somebody always has some sort of tell, or there may be some giveaways or takeaways that can help identify if the intent is different than what they're saying, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you could create a better experience for the customer. But I think um, the biggest thing that has been made possible by these very advanced neural nets and these models that we've been able to put together is you could use the core essence of human behavior towards maximizing those outcomes, and that's different than training and process and automation and all of those other things. That's literally understanding who this person is at scale, and then leveraging their core internal abilities towards achieving success. So putting them in a situation that you know um, basically sets them up for success, and it's a win-win-win. I mean, the client wins first, company wins second, and the agent or the worker wins. I mean, they're more engaged, they feel more fulfilled, they feel they've done a better job. So, and you could do that without necessarily any external um, influence, about either training or tools, or that would require some sort of a learning gap, etc. So it's a very, very different approach. So we're coming at it from a perspective of biology and human psychology, and marrying that with AI, whereas everything else in the CCAS space is automation. I mean, even the sentiment AI is purely word based and all of those things. So it's a little bit uh, of trying to think out of the box, and I think we're getting amazing results.
Yeah, I think, on the path toward artificial general intelligence, or AGI, where we think that, AI can at least surpass human analytical and prediction, those types of things, right? But then you get into sentience, right? Is something, a being, a thinking, conscious, feeling entity or being, right? And so if it's just pure data, that's what, when you watch all the movies, right? The robots that are out there, they have just data, but as soon as I guess the way we perceive if something is sentient is the ability to interact with the environment, make decisions, have emotions, etc. Right, and so that's what you're kind of building in, some of the emotions, which generally robots or data based analytical tools lack. Right.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent. I mean, I don't think we're there yet in terms of building a sentient agent. But if you do get there, you want that sentient agent to be as much as human-like in terms of an ethical, moral, and societal context as possible, so that it can relate to us and we can relate to it. That would be important, I think.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit. When we were first talking, you had I think you were on a TEDx podcast, which we're going to talk about later. It's like at 20K, now it's at 100K, and you're out there doing a lot of really cool things. What was it about the AI Space podcast that resonated with you and made you want to be a guest on the show? We're a pretty new show and growing pretty fast still, but just some of your thoughts maybe for some of our audience out there that have been listening.
Yeah, look, I mean, I thought we had a really good initial conversation, and I always sort of like, in terms of um, my criteria of sort of which platforms to spend time on is always like, what are the questions? I mean, are those questions meaningful and interesting, and do I relate with those sort of ideas? And if it is, let's go talk about it. The more we talk about it, it's better. So I think I'm thankful for you to have me on the show. I think it's great.
Oh, that's awesome. And we're actually going to get into that. So before we continue, I want to invite everyone to follow Rana Gujral and like, comment, subscribe to the AI Space podcast, because that helps us grow the show and have more impressive guests like Rana. And, thanks to all our subscribers and viewers out there. And speaking of questions, in terms of strategy and mindset, you're leading a successful company or successful entrepreneur, person, executive, right? What do you see as some of the critical insights you can share around vision and mindset for long-term success? A lot of people talk about just dream, but dreaming alone doesn't work, right? What does it take to really be successful?
So I think dreaming is important, but it needs to be done within a specific construct. So what you need to do is, so whatever you're building, whatever experience you're trying to achieve, you need to, one, have the ability, and actually also do the action. You just have the ability and you don't do it, doesn't mean anything, of coming together and thinking about what does that Uber experience look like, whatever experience you're building. Let's call it the 10 experience. Let's call it the Uber experience. But it needs to be thought through from a perspective of a dream, not necessarily being bounded by constraints of achievability. And we all have our biases. So if you're an engineer, you're going to have the feasibility bias. Is it the engineering constraints, isn't that? I mean, and so you're going to limit your ability to dream. And if you're on the financial side, I mean, you're going to be looking at resources. You got to put those aside. So think about how movie gets made and how a producer or a writer or director is thinking about it. They're not thinking about whether it's real or not. They're just making the thinking. They're dreaming. That's what you need to do for your experience. Call it the 10 experience. And then come back to Earth and decide where you are. Are you at 2? Are you at 3? Don't call yourself a 5 when you are a 3. You are a 3, then it's a 3. And, come up with what does it take to get to 3 to 4. And you'll never get to maybe 10 because, again, it's a dream, right? So maybe 8 or 9 is the best you can be, but maybe you can. And work towards that in a very sort of tangible manner. The second piece is um, the business side of it, which is you need to have a team that understands how to monetize every step, whether from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. Come up with a aspect of what does math look like there. How many conversions you need, how many clients, agents, what are the margins, and it'll be a different calculation for each step. And you do that, and you gotta get everybody aligned on that, and you just sort of chip at it and work towards it. And oftentimes you realize that those two are not linked. I mean, they're completely independent. So, for example, you could have a 10 vision, and you could even achieve it, but that doesn't mean that it's a big business. And so you have to do that in tandem. I mean, you'd say it could be you could achieve that 10 vision, but it's a couple $100 million business, which is not bad, but you'll never achieve $1 billion in revenue. There's just not a market there. So you have to sort of understand those dynamics of it. And then just sort of I think what I see is like, I mean, I had a chance to talk to a lot of very, very smart people in very successful companies, so to say, in large companies, and you ask them, they can't tell you. The CEO can't tell you, and the executives can't tell you what the 10 vision looks like. And what they're calling the 10 vision is a very myopic what they need to get done in the next 2-3 years. It's like, okay, but that's fine. I get it. But what about that? Like, what about when, what do you want to be when you grow up type of thing? Like, the 10. Oh, we'll worry about that later. It's like, okay, but how do you know, like, so you get to that point in time, the next 2-3 years, and how do you know if that was the right path? If you don't know eventually where you want to be, maybe you made a bunch of wrong decisions. I mean, so you're just gonna. So I think that's the thing which I feel, and then some have it, right? I mean, like like folks like Steve Jobs are famous towards that, and it's just like as an anchor. This is what we're gonna get to, and you call it the reality distortion field, and everybody else thinks like you are completely crazy. Like, what are you talking about? We cannot even visualize it, what you're going to go. But like, and it just looks unachievable and really dumb to work towards something that most people can't even get their head around. But that is what that dream vision needs to look like. And maybe that happens. And when it happens, magic happens.
No, I think it's very powerful insight there, especially getting to 10 and you maybe at 2 or 3, but I think the critical thing is that everyone waits till 10 to monetize or maybe 7 to monetize. But what I'm even telling us people I'm focused with is like, if you're not solving a pain point that clients are willing to pay for on a repeated basis, you're going to be in trouble. I think what you said about monetizing each of the steps, because that's going to really get you to that vision. And I think a lot of times too, founders are easily can have a 10 vision, right? But they don't take the steps to get to that 10. And sometimes when you go into these large companies, they may have executives that will never have that 10 vision because they're probably going to be there 2-3 years or 5 years, and that's their time frame, right? And you talked about mindset, and I think this is really going back to your TEDx talk, right? So can you maybe talk to us a little bit about mindset, how our mind adds information, deletes information, Are we living in a reality versus simulation? Whatever you feel comfortable talking about on that aspect.
Now we're going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be the mind bending part, which is going to be a little bit fun for me. So,
my larger purpose of that TED Talk, which I do recommend everybody watch, was to pause and, you know, question certain things that you're just simply taking for granted, right? I mean, it's a reality as a user interface, right? For example, so the deeper question isn't just whether we live in a simulation or whether reality itself is, essentially, it's really whether, is what we see, the reality, is that really just a user interface designed by evolution to simplify something far more complex beneath. And we see a lot of evidence towards that. And so think of our senses as like a simplified dashboard indicators that help us survive, just like, the computer desktop simplifies the complexity of circuits and software. And perhaps our reality is a simplified interface of something much infinitely deeper, challenging everything we believe about existence itself. So I think that was a larger goal. And I think it's an important question to ask because we see a lot of evidence towards that. We're now, getting better and better in terms of sort of, unveiling and looking behind the curtain. And yeah, I mean, the interesting things are the thing is so there's a lot of possibilities open up. I mean, simulation is definitely a possibility, although there's no way for us to tell. I mean, it's an intriguing paradox that if, the reality is simulated, then, the question is who's creating the simulation, and could that simulation itself be in a simulation, all that stuff, this.
And then you get the multiverse and all these other types of things too, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of that's the purpose. But I think, okay, there's a lot of different angles you can go in. You can go into the multiverse angles. You can go into the aspects of simulation and all that stuff. Or you could just simply look at it and say, well, this is how an interface works, right? Because, I mean, our eyes are not like a camera viewfinder. That's a big sort of like the analogy there. A camera viewfinder is simply looking at what's out there, and eyes don't look at simply what's out there. I mean, it's basically collecting data. That data gets processed, and then what we visualize is not what our eyes actually take in. I mean, it's very difficult for people to understand that. I mean, it's changed. It's morphed. I mean, the brain is a full production studio. It's taking all this data and then it's creating visuals for us, which is not what the eyes saw. You could see it, you could measure it. And so the question is, well, then, okay, what does it all mean? And, how does that change how I live and how I function and how I think? I thought those were important questions for us to understand. And that's what that intent was for the TED Talk.
What you said about the brain being a production system, you talked about how our eyes and brain interpret sight. And this is something I always thought about too, because you have a red microphone and I have red, but it's really compared to yours and probably more of a crimson or whatever color it is, right? And light has hit it and it's coming back to our eyes and we say it's red. But actually, I think when we say something's red, actually that's the only wavelength that's being refracted back to us, right? So is it really red? Is it just the frequency that's been blocked? But like you said, our eyes or our mind has constructed something to represent your microphone as that variation of red. And my wife put this cover because my leather chair was brown and it was all worn out. And she goes, "You can't have a worn out leather chair." So she put this cover on there. And so, and this is a representation, right?
It's a reference. I mean, yeah, it is an interpretation of the wavelength of light as perceived by our brain, and so it's categorized into different color sets. But there's no literal like red out there. I mean, the physical matter, the color isn't a property of the physical matter. You throw light at it, and it reflects a certain wavelength, and that's categorized as a certain color. I mean, all these things, but people don't realize that it goes much beyond color. I mean, taste and smell is exactly the same thing. The physical matter does not have those properties of taste and smell as we think that they might have. I mean, those are chemical interpretations by the brain. So there is this layer that is adding an interesting element to make a reality more interesting and also more understandable and more meaningful to us. And it's also shared, right? So you and I share the same thing. Otherwise, there is no discussion about red if I see it differently and you see it differently. So there's a shared construct and there's an individual construct, and there's lot of really interesting, cool stuff that is so obvious, is so well understood, but we don't even think about it. We don't. We just take it for granted, and and I feel that it's fascinating that we do that. I mean, we read a lot of books and we try to do a lot of self growth, and but we don't stop and think about, hey, hold on a second, let me try to figure out what's happening around me and what does it really mean? What questions does that pose? And where does that eventually lead us? And do I make different choices in terms of how I function based on some of those answers?
Yeah, it's like when I go into a TV store and there's 50 TVs on the wall, and I look at the same screen, but you can tell the different hues of blues and reds. And like, well, okay, which TV is actually the transmitting the correct scene, right, in terms of color? And this is more a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer this, but it's something I thought about when we're in this conversation. Is like when we talk about simulation. Am I living in my own simulation? Is everyone living the same simulation, or do we live in one simulation, kind of like a networking gaming thing? Like now we're connecting, and I may think that I'm the main character, and we may be both the non-player characters, and the viewer may be the real entity that's living, right? And then we have a Wizard of Oz in the background, Mark, who's our producer that no one sees right now, who may be the puppet master. We don't know, but you don't have to answer that. But those are the types of things that
He's the only main character here.
the things you can start thinking about, right?
Yeah. There's so many different ideas around sort of like, that come to surface around sort of like, who's really, is a reality really even shared, or are we all living our own individual realities with some minor overlaps to keep things interesting? But we all think we're the main characters with everybody else. It sort of happened to be in our story. And I mean, it's definitely plausible, and that potentially sort of like it could potentially make sense, because what you do see, there's a lot of evidence that you know that even though you potentially don't have free will as you might think you do, because it's in many ways it's a deterministic set of outcomes based on what's happened previously. That there's like, if this is just a digital construct, you could potentially influence it and change it, right? Because if it's all made up, then you can make it up to something that you may like more or better, right? I mean, and so and those things are interesting ideas and interesting concepts for us to sort of get our head around.
Yeah, I think also in terms of AI, and especially talking about quantum computing and qubits and all this kind of stuff, right? But in terms of there's deterministic, but there's also, especially in AI, especially on LLMs, a probabilistic element, right? So we talk about the cat is, and most people may say black because there's a 60% chance. But if you change the context of construct, you may say the cat is a Persian cat or the cat is something else, right? So as you add information or decide, so there's the deterministic aspect, but it's not 100%. Even in LLMs and other AI, there's a probabilistic element to that, right? So I think that's the thing we'll have to kind of figure out as AI evolves, and even quantum computing, where things can live in two states at once, right? Like kind of like Schrodinger's cat, in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we haven't figured out why there is quantum entanglement, but we can measure it, and we know that it does exist, and it does challenge, a lot of theories that Einstein had around sort of, a deterministic physical world, and it's hopefully, once we have better tools, we can sort of unmask that and get a better sense of sort of what's going around it. But I suspect we'll probably never know, because if you're really in a box. How do you get the story of outside the box? I mean, you just can't. I mean, you have to be outside the box. You have to somehow travel outside the box to get the full picture. And would that even be possible? So there's a lot of really sort of interesting ideas for us to pursue. I think one of the most magical things that has happened with AI is that um, the fundamental existential questions about who are we, why do we exist, and where are we, aspects of consciousness, et cetera, those, you know, there's an aspect. I mean, these questions are typically not just can't be just answered by science. I mean, it's got to be a combination of philosophy and science. But AI is helping us getting closer to these answers in many ways. So as we get deeper and deeper into that, I mean, we're getting a better sense of what it means to be human, or what we think of what human really means, or ourselves itself, our existence itself. And so I think that's really fascinating. It's like, the initial thought was like, okay, the more we work towards AI, the less human we become, and we lose what it means to be human. But it kind of almost, to me, it looks like it is helping us understand what human even means, and maybe what we thought it meant wasn't really true. And so it's getting deeper into some of those questions that we always had.
Yep. No, yeah. Now we're going to come back to Earth, and at least what we think is reality. And apologize to the folks that maybe pulled a muscle on that, or et cetera. But now we'll get into like some of the real business aspects too. But I enjoyed that. In terms of business scaling, right? What do you see? What are things that we can implement and scale with AI effectively without unnecessary complexity? Right. A lot of times people just want to put AI, and I've tried different things. It just adds a lot of complexity and cost. On your perspective, how do we address that? The scaling portion of it.
Yeah, I think the scaling story is going to be different for every business, because every business is different, and it has its own unique minutia aspects of what it takes to effectively deliver value in your business ecosystem. But as was sort of saying earlier, we have these incredible tools at our disposal. These tools allow us to process data better. It allows us to, get better insights from that data. It allows us to, engage with our clients better. It allows us to optimize our experiences. It enhances and improves pretty much every functional and operational aspect of running a business or a company. Whether that be sales or marketing or engineering or product development or public relations, everything. And you could potentially up your game just by spending time and understanding what tools are at your disposal, and also starting to use them more effectively and better than their competition, and allows you to move faster. An interesting sort of things that we sort of see happening in Silicon Valley is that the teams are getting smaller and smaller, right? So it used to be that you need 15 to 20% team. As a startup, you needed that. You need a CEO, obviously, but you then need a sales guy and a marketing guy, and then you need a bunch of engineers. You need some specialist on the product side, and some specialist on the finance side, et cetera, to sort of put it together. And but what you're kind of seeing is that you could do all of this with maybe a fourth of resources. One person can do so many different things, right? So you probably with maybe potentially you could run a company now with a product manager, a couple engineers, and potentially a CEO, and one generalist, so a 5-person team. And and then just use tools, and you could build a product really quickly, an MVP, and using some of these agentic AI tools, and start to test the market, and even get traction, even get early customers and sales, and then go from there. So it's a game changer, right? So then if there's a set of if is the folks who have been natively trained, I mean, the young folks who have just graduated, and for them, ChatGPT is not a fringe thing. It's a way of life because they've existed. I mean, it's part of their existence. Um, they're going to be very effective in doing so. And if you're not aware of how to use these tools, it's going to be very hard for you to compete with that. So those are some of the things that, you already sort of see happening.
I completely agree with you. I think there's a couple things, to unpack there that you said, especially when we talk about scalability, you got to do something that's, repeatable, and you're able to grow it. And if you're customizing everything, right, and you have 100 products out there, right, if you don't whittle it down to the ones that actually generate, Pareto principle, that's generating most of the value, 20% that's generating 80%, and to figure that out, now with these tools, you're able to do a lot more. And we just had an episode with Wade Foster from Zapier on the last episode, and we're talking about, he's saying that even some of the newer entrepreneurs have the advantage because they don't have all the baggage, right? Like someone like me, who I used to be, my strength is go to market strategy and execution, but now as an entrepreneur, I have to put on my CMO hat, my CFO hat, my IT CTO hat, and I think I may just change my title to CXO. And now I'm realizing, more as a variable, because now if with these tools, I'm able to do a lot more. I have a VA, leverage some of these AI tools. I can actually scale a bit faster. And even now I'm looking at the podcast, and it's been growing, and I'm seeing other folks coming out like, hey, their message sounds a little bit similar to mine. So I got to continually up my game and do things. So I'm realizing to do that, to scale, I have to make some tweaks and start using, I have, if I'm bootstrapping, I have to be very cautious. I don't have a $10 million check. I don't want one to go do all this. But doing a little bit more guerrilla tactics, you're able to grow and scale in a different way. In terms of technology, so are there any cutting edge tools or frameworks that you think are essential for building a solid AML architecture and stack? Or, what's your thoughts on that?
Um, I mean, I think these would be specific to some of the things that you're sort of looking to go build. I mean, we're toying with a lot of different. I mean, a lot of different sort of capabilities that exist out there. We're using some very sort of, I'd say, cutting edge, CNNs, the convolutional neural networks. These are implementations over transformers to sort of, ex- accelerate sort of how our models learn and adapt. And we're using a lot of LLMs in many different capacities, different ones. I mean, each LLMs have their own sort of, I'd say, areas where they excel, and so we're using them for different aspects. I mean, LLMs I think are great for any NLP implementation. So we're using both OpenAI and Claude, and some others as well. And then there are a lot of these sort of specialist apps and tools that leverage and sort of have built sort of like these micro agents on top of these sort of large language models, which are very specific to a certain task, which are very useful. Like, so I think what you kind of sort of see is like, used to be a situation where you would build an entire platform. And now you could potentially build your own. I mean, you would buy a platform, but you could potentially, as a consumer, build your own platform, and you would buy specific interoperable agents, and which sort of operate within a certain framework, and then really sort of pick the best in breed, and also have almost full adaptability and flexibility in terms of, as your needs changes, you swap those things out. A vast majority of the cost on most companies is sort of technology obsolescence, and you're moving from either on-prem to cloud, but even on cloud, the technologies are changing and shifting, so you're doing another tech migration. It's a perpetual cycle of tech obsolescence and tech debt, and all the things that you need to do. More than half of the resources in any company are focused on just that, on not the value added stuff that builds the business, which is, hey, let's add new features, let's add new products, let's make our experience for the client better, let's make the delivery piece smoother, but all this stuff. And so I think you get towards more agentic AI implementations, and we're not there yet, but I think, you get to a point where, you see a problematic component, you throw it out, you replace it with something else, and there's no um, real impact in terms of sort of how your platform functions, and it's a platform that you've assembled together. So I think that's kind of where we're headed, and there's a lot of opportunities for a lot of companies to build those agents. I mean, that's why you're sort of seeing a lot of interest on the agentic AI front, and build those specific agents that could be relevant. And it doesn't take a lot. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of resources or money. I mean, you could, if as long as you understand the problem domain and you have the right set of people to focus on it, and you could potentially build a better agent than some of these billion-dollar companies. So very exciting time. I mean, this is the whole model. Both the building model is changing, the consuming model changing, the buying model is changing. I mean, all of this is really happening at a rapid level. I mean, I personally question, companies like SAP, how would they compete in that space? I mean, they would have to adapt and sort of embrace this and get into this model themselves. This whole aspects of building this sort of like this specific ARP engines. I mean, I could see them all getting agenticized.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In terms of large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, etc., right? They've been trained on general data, right? And that is, say you have a specific vertical like oil and gas, real estate, whatever, may not be the best solution. You may use RAG, retrieval augmented generation. You may, on a previous episode, we had Julian Simon from RC.ai talking about small language models were a little bit more fine tuned to the situation, a little bit more cost effective in terms of using tokens and the compute costs and those types of things. And then you said about agents, right? In terms of, we've had automation, right, in terms of some tools, but in terms of agents acting for you, and that could be help, especially in terms of reducing costs in a company, especially some of the entry level positions. I think some of the cost arbitrage and offshoring may go away if you're able to use agents, right? So I think it's going to disrupt, places like India and others in terms of some of the offshoring models, and yeah, the continual evolution toward AGI, etc. When we first spoke, you had mentioned Daniel Kahneman, and you talked about systems one versus systems two thinking. And why I think the word that's important in terms of AI too is some of the work you're doing uh, kind of ties into that. So maybe you can elaborate on some of that and some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I call it the revenge of Systems One. That's what's happening now. I think it's a good title for a book. Which I'm just trying to get my head around too. Like, maybe I should do it this year. But Daniel Kahneman, had this amazing book called Machinery of Thought, where he categorized the sort of the two types of thinking that the human brain operates in: the Systems One and Systems Two. And and technology has historically prioritized System Two, which is the slow, analytical, reasoning type of thinking. But the human life overwhelmingly runs on Systems One, which is our fast, intuitive, emotional responses. And 95% of our human thinking is Systems One thinking. And so the next big revolution is creating AI that understands and replicates this intuitive cognition. So, and that's what we've been building, right? So, I mean, it's sort of like, building these systems around emotional intuition, quick judgments, and gut level decisions, right? So, for example, literally creating decision making entities that use intuition and gut to make decisions, which can then which can augment the systems two, or the methodical and the number crunching type of thinking, and then you have this entity that truly makes a decision like or thinks and then makes a decision like a human brain does. And when you get into the facets of not just augmenting but replacing decision making, I think that becomes really exciting. So so the question is, can algorithms trust their gut? And what if the most sophisticated decision making tools in the future don't just crunch data but emulate human intuition? And the answer is that intuition isn't magic, right? It's rapid pattern recognition rooted in experience. And so what we can see is that AI can emulate system one to predict human intent intuitively. We built those engines. I mean, we built intent mapping engines. We can predict intent in very specific domains. And so then you get these decision making systems that are faster, more effective, and deeply human like in their capabilities. Um, and so I think the paradox of AI development is decision paralysis. Algorithms become more overwhelmed when relying only on deliberate analysis, and the real world decisions often lack complete information or adequate time. And so this is where the magic of combining these two come to fruition. And you could and it also replicates the true human way of thinking. And so very lots of applications on the national security and defense side, like the critical decision making, real time decision making, and we're now sort of applying that, right? So we build these engines initially for research. Then we started to apply that on the CCAS opportunities, the contact center side, and now we're looking beyond that, and we're saying, can these be applied on the critical decision making on the national security and defense side? Because we work very closely with a lot of the government partners, and some really exciting use cases are coming to surface, and we're tackling that.
Yeah, no, that's great. In terms of systems one thinking, what you say, fast intuitive thinking. If you think about human society, as we've evolved, we've had to be like that. Whether you're running away from predators, the weather's changing, shelter, all these things. So you need to be fast intuitive, or you're not going to survive to produce the next generation. It's the ones that are fast intuitive, but that alone, you're not going to be able to survive in this world, right? So slowly, people had to adapt to systems two thinking, to like planning for food and doing farming and other things to make sure that you have sustenance to sustain, creating the society. So, we started from systems one and developed more into systems two, and AI is coming more from systems two. And, as I'm using more AI, like to think I'm a rational, structured type person, but it's forcing me to also be a little bit more of a system, even deeper systems two thinker when I'm analyzing some of my metrics, right? Why is something performing well or not so performing well, right? So I think that's going to be interesting in how those two blend over time, especially in a national security situation where you can't be slow and rational all the time. If you see maybe there's some triggers out there in society that's happening, and it's like, hey, there's a higher probability, there's some chatter, something happening, higher probability for a terrorist event or some other type of tragic event, and if we can prevent that by being a little bit more systems one versus systems two, I think that's where that comes into play, right?
Yeah, but I also think you're right. So, for example, um, let's say there's a situation where there's an incoming missile strike, and you have to make a decision on taking a counter action, and you don't really have the ability to have a committee meeting or discussion, or you may not even have the ability, because it maybe takes microseconds or seconds to react and make a decision. So, do you do you make purely decision based on data? And oftentimes, that may not be the right decision making. And so when a human would make a decision, you take a lot of data, and then it will rely on, what we call instinct or intuition. That's really sort of leveraging all of the past unrelated information, not pertaining to this particular data set, and coming up with yay or nay. And it sounds very, I'd say, sort of unachievable to be able to do that using an AI algorithm, but we're now sort of seeing that it's not. It's just pattern recognition at a different, broader level, and there are certain things that you may not feel is relevant to the decision you're making, but your past experiences and your instincts and your learning sort of come to play, and that is what systems one is. So it's just like you know the answer instantly. Yes, I should do this or not. and something just tells you. Our neurons wired like that. Our brains sort of think in that sense. I mean, and vast majority of what we do every day, the decisions and the thinking that we do is in that bucket. Only 5% of the time we're sort of like methodically looking at data. But almost all of AGI, sort of not AGI, almost all of AI implementation that you see today is systems too. And that was the easy thing to do. That was the first step. And obviously, AI has an edge in terms of compute and data processing. So that made sense. Um, the next step, so this is like, the next step, this is the next step in evolution is systems one, thinking modules. And then the third step would be putting it together. And I think that's what gets us to AGI.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to make sure if a missile's coming in, there's a little bit of systems two thinking where it doesn't cause World War III and IV at the same time. But then, in terms of democratization, right? I think AI is a good democratization tool, but what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities in making AI accessible to people from a variety of industries, perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds? How can we bridge this gap?
I think AI is already doing that, right? I mean, it just like internet did, right? So it's available, to everyone. It's not relegated to like the AI tools are available to you as much as to the CFO of the company, or to you as much as the chief legal officer of the company. And so, if you need an opinion, you can get that insight. That's not your training. You didn't get your master's in finance. You're not a CFA. But you have those tools now, and you get those data points, and you can understand. I mean, you can simply if you're trying to somebody sent you something of a legal letter, you could have ChatGPT explain that to you in simpler terms. So that's democratization at a very simplest level, right? So that those are tools that are available to everybody. So everyone's better, smarter, more effective in terms of pretty much everything. And now the points of differentiation is your ability to use those tools. Now, I mean, and these tools are available around the globe, every part of the world, irrespective of so if you have access to internet, and a computer or some way to get to that, I mean, you have access to all of these insights and knowledge. So it is leveling the playing field in a massive, massive way. You're going to see sort of so the traditional advantages sort of being blurred, and I think AI, internet did that to a massive extent, and then AI takes it to the next level. I mean, internet did it by bringing sort of like connecting the information and making that information available, and I think AI takes it to the next level by helping you understand the information without necessarily having a master's degree in a specific field, and it's just a step forward.
No, I agree. I think the next trillion-dollar company could be a 10 to 50-person company. But that leads us into my next question in terms of ethical AI. We're racing toward AGI and other things, but how can we balance AI innovation and fast time to market with ethical and responsible AI governance and development?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of you know there's a lot of aspects to that. I mean, I think I think that once AGI surpasses the human cognitive abilities, our value as humans won't really disappear. It will just shift. And so essentially, perhaps the ultimate purpose for humanity becomes teaching AGI meaning and ethics and empathy. Qualities that raw intelligence alone doesn't guarantee. So I think the post AGI existence might force us into an existential renaissance. I mean, rediscovering what truly makes us human, and so I think those are the things that we're just starting to get our head around. I mean, it's not necessarily something that we have done a lot of work towards as an industry. The things that we have sort of focused on are more sort of simpler stuff, which is eliminating biases in the models, and making sure that you're not using the tool that you have as a weapon, which is going to be a situation with every tool. If you understand chemistry, well, let's not use the chemistry to make do biowarfare. That's, I think, the law of the land and setting the right guidelines and rules takes care of that part. You do bad things, you'll be punished. I don't think we need to reinvent society from that perspective. I think from that perspective, AI is no different than anything else. It's like, understanding chemistry. It's like, yeah, you understand it. You have now more knowledge. You could mix different things, and you can make medicine. You could also do biological warfare. You can also create diseases. So don't do that. You do it, you'll be punished. You do this, great, you'll be rewarded. Society will reward you, and everything is great. And so I think it's that. Um, the larger question is when you achieve AGI, and then you get to a point where it surpasses human cognitive abilities at some point. You get to ASI. What kind of AI is it? Does it have the same value system? What do we need to do today to sort of make that value system happen? At some point we'll have to think about AGI consciousness and granting rights to AGI, and all that stuff will come to play. But I don't think those are the big problems today. I think that's something for us to think about and get a head around. But I think currently it's more around sort of just ensuring that those basic sort of guardrails are intact and they work. And I think for the most part they do work. The guardrails that we see, it's very hard today to make AGI do something bad, unless that's your specific intent. Like, you're trying very hard for those guardrails to fail, and then you might crack through it. But for the most part, those guardrails seem to be working, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I think we need to be responsible about that. And I think just also some of the models, 'cause, as I've been getting more into this, when I see on the internet, there's a lot of violence, hate, sexuality, a lot of these things, and a lot of these models are learning some of those things. We just gotta make sure that's not what it's learning versus the good things that's about our society. So, any final thoughts, insights, encouragement for those seeking to get into this space or struggling to build their business?
Oh, it's the best time to be an entrepreneur, because you could do it faster and cheaper than any other time in the past. And you could do it by along doing whatever you're doing currently. And so if you wanted to do it, then there's less excuses not to do it. So I think um, the only advice is, like, pay attention to what's happening around you. There's a lot that's happening around you on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. And it's valuable to keep some time aside in your calendar to just catch up on what's happened this week, and what's interesting, and where things are moving, etc., etc. All on the LLM side, like, that's been the store focus. Just like the fascinating stuff that keeps. I was just sort of looking at this new paper that came out of China recently around sort of self-learning, and it's sort of literally creating its own synthetic data, and it's called a zero reasoning model. And so it's not necessarily relying on chain of thought or reasoning. It just simply sort of like, learning by playing with itself and creating its own data, and it's getting some amazing results. So that stuff is fascinating, right? This kind of new stuff, it's coming out pretty much every month, every week now. And I think that would be the big advice: is don't get left behind. Educate yourself.
Rana, I think we can talk all day about these mind-bending topics in the AI space, but we're coming up on time. So for our listeners, where's the best place where they can learn more about behavioral signals or connect with you?
I think I'm available on pretty much every main platform, social media platforms. So take your pick. I mean, LinkedIn is a good pick, or Instagram. I think those two are the top ones. If it's a business related, company related matter, just go to a web page and fill out a contact form. It gets monitored. Everything gets responded to. So if you want to work with us in some capacity, explain to us how, and somebody will come back to you and we can have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, folks, in terms of the show, we talked about vision and mindset, in terms of how to get to you have a dream, but how do you get to that 10 level and stair step it? We talked about the technology stack in terms of systems 1 versus systems 2 thinking. We talked about business scaling in terms of how to grow and expand your business. We talked about democratization in terms of not getting left behind, ethical and responsible AI, and making sure that we have the right governance models and frameworks in place. We feel positive about the future, but we have to be responsible guardians at the end of the day. So, awesome. Everyone, make sure to check out and connect with Rana Gujral. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and find us on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple. Rana, I've learned a lot about, on this episode. You've expanded my reality in a bit. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. I'm your host, Sanjay Kalluvilayil, founder and CEO of Stonehaas Advisors. I hope you gain a wealth of game-changing real-world insights to grow, transform, and scale to new levels and dimensions leveraging AI. I hope to see you all next time. Thanks so much.